Paul Isaac Holmes was a 33-year-old from Durham, North Carolina. He was an avid bike rider with an older brother and younger sister. On November 13th, 2023, Paul was captured on video at a store near his parents' house, despite him having seemingly disappeared 2 weeks before that. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Dunsel, and this is Unfound. As many of you know, I really try to stay out of the "this is how kids should be raised" debate. I'm not a parent. I probably will never be a parent. Thus, I'm not going to try to tell somebody else how to do something that I have never done. This goes for friends, family, and Unfound's guests. And even if I were that kind of person, I don't think I could offer up much insightful help, because from the outside it all looks like somewhat of a crapshoot. Great adults having troubled kids, troubled adults having great kids. Who knows? Yet, if we're to stick to disappearances, we have a lot of parents with guilt. Could they have done something differently that would have put their children on different paths that wouldn't have ended up with them going missing? Frankly, I have my doubts. Even if we're to take two missing people who are on each end of the extremes, let's say Jody Husentrut on one end and Karina Slusser on the other, my impression is that the parents of these women could not have changed the outcomes. Pretty sure. Well, with Paul Holmes, you will hear about addiction, guilt, and doubt. The question covering all of it is, how do we go about breaking the cycle? And now a summary of the case. Paul Holmes came from a unique family. The members range from 2 engineers to a YouTube influencer specializing in sailing. And everyone in the family could juggle and ride unicycles. Yes, really. Paul had ideas about becoming a tax attorney or an orthodontist. Yet when he finally went to college, he was undecided. But there the problem started, with Paul trying heroin for the first time during his freshman year. That began almost 15 years of addiction and sobriety, going back and forth between the two, sometimes for years at a time. Within all of it, Paul rode a bicycle across the United States. However, after this trip, Paul reached his worst point and returned to Durham to live with his family, but the addictions continued. So, on October 29th, 2023, Paul left his parents' home for a walk. This was not unusual. Yet, he did not return. Video from a convenience store checked the next day showed Paul meeting with someone, obviously to buy drugs. Calls to his phone went unanswered. Yet this was not the beginning of Paul's disappearance. On November 13th, at the very same store, only 1.5 miles from his parents' home, Paul reappeared driving a Toyota. He met 2 people in the parking lot. These 2 different from the ones 2 weeks before. This was also obviously a drug deal. Paul drove away from the store on his own. He was never seen again. Over the past 2 years, only one person in this group of dealers has been identified, and that person has been unhelpful. Listening to parents' stories of struggling with their children's addictions is one of the toughest jobs I have with this podcast. It makes me happy that I didn't have such problems, but it also reminds me why I'm happy I never had kids. Contemplate what the best way is for parents to deal with their children under these circumstances, while you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1. When Paul left on October 29th, 2023, did he plan to leave, or was it a spur-of-the-moment decision? Number 2, is tracking down the Toyota and the stolen license plate the best way to resolve this disappearance? And number 3, on that note though, and not to oppose my guest, but are we sure the guy on November 13th was really Paul? Paul's family is not sure what happened, but everyone is in agreement that the cause was drugs. The guest for this episode is Paul's mother, Anne. Unfound news. There's no Unfound Now or Found episode for the beginning of this month. I'm at my dad's and time just isn't as plentiful as usual. I will publish the next episodes a month from now. Next, the husband of Lonnie Rogers recently confessed to killing her. Still no word as to whether he will reveal where he put her. Finally, I'm still in Pennsylvania, but I anticipate driving back to Florida next week. Maybe. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the mother of Paul Holmes, Anne. Anne, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you, Ed.
And for everybody out there, we are doing this interview coincidentally on my father's birthday, December 1st of 2025. Let's start here. Just tell the listeners a little bit about your family. How many kids do you have? Paul included. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about, how maybe Paul compares to the rest of your children. Maybe you want to talk about, where you all grew up, where they all grew up, where you lived. You can start anywhere you want within any of that.
All right. Well, I'll start by telling you my husband, Steve, was an electrical engineer and just recently retired. I got to do my dream job of being a stay-home parent. And I would say that we had a really happy, stable, normal family life. Well, the only thing that wasn't normal about it was they didn't play soccer or football or basketball. They juggled and rode unicycles and created all kinds of crazy art and made movies and did a little bit of individual sports like swimming. They loved cycling, but they weren't real team sport kids.
Okay.
They all were well-adjusted and successful in school. The oldest is Sam. He's 2 years older than Paul, so he's 37 right now. Okay. And then Paul is 35 right now, and our daughter Sophie is 26. Okay. And they're super close, especially as they grew older, as they became young adults. I think their relationships got even closer. Although I would say that none of them have ever been real good about talking about their feelings. And I think that's one thing I wish I had been more successful at facilitating that for them. I don't think that Paul, I don't know exactly when Paul started feeling different from everybody, maybe, and struggling with mental health issues, but it wasn't something that he shared with his siblings.
So you had a daughter that had two older brothers. I guess she had nothing to worry about, right? She was well protected.
She was well protected, and they now they are all seem so much closer in age since they're all out of school, and Sophie lives in Charleston, South Carolina. She's a civil engineer for the town of Mount Pleasant.
Wow, impressive.
Sam lives wherever the wind blows, quite literally. He sails for a living. He's currently in Southeast Asia.
Wow, that's interesting. So he's a professional sailor?
I guess I'm not sure. It's YouTube can make anybody a professional at anything. That's
true. That's funny.
So I guess he's what they call them influencers, I guess. But anyway,
okay.
So he films his sailing adventures.
That's fantastic. And this all happened growing up in Durham or somewhere else?
So the kids were born when we lived in Wake Forest. They were technically all born in Raleigh, which is Wake Forest is like a bedroom community of Raleigh, North Carolina. They were born in a hospital in Raleigh, but they all grew up in Wake Forest. And we lived right off of a main street in a historic district, and the kids could, ride their bikes to get their own candy bar and soda and ride their bikes or walk to the ice cream parlor. So they had a kind of freedom that a lot of kids don't really have anymore because so many places, kids have to be driven everywhere. So when they were growing up, they had a lot of independence and they loved living in that area. We did move when we were sort of outgrowing the house, and we did move when the boys were in middle school and high school. We did move to a boring house in a boring subdivision, and the house worked well for us, but it was none of us really liked the area. We all realized that we liked that more urban setting of a small downtown.
Little too cookie cutter or something like that. Little too.
Yep. It worked. It was easier to maintain, and then about 10 years ago, we moved to Durham, North Carolina. So at that time, our youngest was still in high school, but the two boys were
older.
Were beyond that.
Okay. Very good. So we got a good picture of that. We have some engineers in this family. So we definitely have some high IQs, I guess would say. Congratulations to all of them.
I would say that Paul had the highest IQ of the three of them.
Did.
Sorry if the other two are listening. Very, very bright, super creative, outside the box thinker, very successful in his, AP classes and everything in high school. Okay. They all did fine. They all did well, but I would say that Paul was maybe the highest IQ. I don't know.
All right.
I don't have their numbers.
Just to Ann's kids out there, she loves all of you. Just remember.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we are here to talk about Paul, so let's continue with that. Tell the listeners a little bit more about Paul. You said he's very high IQ. Smart. Just tell a little bit more. How would you describe him? Maybe comparing his personality and the other parts of his being to other people in your family, and maybe talk about his friends too.
So he was actually probably the most gregarious of the three and made friends the most easily. Which was still not real outgoing and gregarious, but the other two were even less so. But he did make friends easily. He had a good group of friends. He has this sense of humor that is so dry. A good portion of the population misses it. Like they just they just don't get it, because he's like his sense of humor is quite unique. Okay. Beautiful artist. Drawings and paintings are just beautiful. He does enjoy, in addition to riding a bicycle, the kids learn to juggle and ride unicycles and all that kind of fun stuff. Maybe I already said that. But
where did that, I have to ask you, where did that come from?
Their mom.
Your mom.
I rode a unicycle. We all rode unicycles in my family, or at least learned. I didn't take it very far. I could just ride your standard unicycle, but the boys had like these giraffe unicycles, and they'd take the pedals off and put them in different positions that they did crazy tricks on them, and went down dirt piles and all that kind of stuff. Sophie was not as into the unicycle phase as they were. And Paul did love cycling, like even when he was little, and my husband used to take the boys mountain bike riding. At one point, he took them out west and rented mountain bikes out there, and they got to experience that. They were probably 12 and 14, something like that.
Did you ever think maybe Paul might go into, and I'm not joking around this, because I have friends, like when I lived in Las Vegas, that actually did work in carnivals, going on a train, going out throughout the United States. Did you ever think he might go into the carnival with skills like that?
I never thought that Paul might do that. Sam actually talked about it Paul wanted to be a tax attorney for the longest time because he was sure they made the most money with the least amount of work. We convinced him that probably wasn't true. And then there was a phase where he wanted to be an orthodontist because he decided they made the most money with the least amount of work. But we convinced him, we tried to get him to focus on things he thought he might enjoy instead. But he didn't really know what he wanted to do. I mean, he was very technically talented, but he also was a really good artist. He talked about nursing for a while, but when he entered college, he really wasn't sure what career path he was, wanted to take.
But I'm not hearing anything about engineering in here. Since your husband was an engineer, that was a tax attorney, orthodontist, but no engineering careers.
No, he didn't. He didn't aspire to be an engineer. Okay. Our daughter did go to NC State and majored in engineering. And my older son also did not want to be an engineer. The older one ended up being an industrial designer, which is an element of engineering and design kind of together, also at NC State. Paul went to Appalachian, which is how we pronounce that school in the mountains, in North Carolina. And like I said, when he went into school, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do. I think probably if he had to suggest one thing that he was most interested in, it would have been something in the health field, probably nursing.
Okay. Well, let's talk about, going to high school. He graduated high school. You said that he went to college, or what can you say about his education further on that?
So high school he did well and had a lot of friends, did well academically, and then he went to Appalachian State University. And I think we were a little surprised that he didn't excel more. And we just kind of chalked it up to kids go through changes, about this time, that he really doesn't know what he wants to do for sure. And he just wasn't feeling it yet. And I know I saw that with our older son, like his first year of college, he didn't do great. But then once he figured out what he wanted to do, it was Dean's List the rest of the way. Yeah. So we weren't really overly concerned. It wasn't like he was failing classes or anything. He just wasn't doing as well as we had expected.
Okay. How did he handle that?
He, it wasn't a big conversation. He didn't seem disappointed or frustrated with himself. If he was, he didn't mention it. He joined a band, and I think he got involved in things like that. And as it turns out, we didn't know it at the time, but someone told me later that Paul's first dose of heroin was when he agreed to let someone inject it in his arm in his dorm in his first couple weeks of his freshman year.
Oh my goodness.
So now that we didn't know that, but certainly that most likely played a part in him not being able to focus as much and even make a decision.
Of course. So I have to ask you, when you heard that, was this before or after he went missing that you heard that?
It was before he went missing. From the time he withdrew from college in his third year until the time he went missing, there were lots of ups and downs.
Right.
And this particular time, I was talking to someone who was currently in recovery but had used with Paul. And sometimes people that are in that place are willing to tell all because they feel like they're doing the right thing, maybe, not everybody. But anyway, I was communicating with somebody that he had known in high school that it turned out that they didn't use in high school together, but they did use, when Paul was out of high school and when he would come back to Wake Forest. And I had met up with that fellow, and he told me who it was that had offered that to him, and that Paul agreed. And that was his first.
Did you ever talk to Paul about that before he went missing, about that first time? Did verify that was a true story or not?
No, I didn't, because I didn't want him to know that friend, that person, had ratted on him like that. So that I didn't ever mention that. I mean, we found out that he was using in that third year. He lived when he went to Appalachian, his roommate was one of his best friends in high school They lived in the dorm for a year, and then they moved into an apartment, and they lived together for 2 years. And one of the things that Tyler said to me was, it's too bad that Paul was able to function so highly with a heroin habit like that, because if we'd known sooner, maybe, we could have stopped this before it got to this point. And he said, I know you're beating yourself up for not knowing, but I lived with your son for 3 years, and I didn't know.
So his best friend was not doing it, but Paul was.
Right.
Okay.
And his friend that he lived with for 3 years and had gone to high school and middle school with and knew him very well, didn't have any idea until that things got really bad in that third year.
Looking back at that freshman year, as you've already stated, maybe didn't do as well as you thought he was going to do. Do you think that was what brought on? I mean, I'm guessing when you were told this freshman year, you had to be wondering what the heck happened. Any insight into why he would have done that in his freshman year? Any precursors that when he was living at home before he went to college, you would ever thought that he would do that?
There are two things, and they're kind of in different directions. One was that I think Paul did have a lot of anxiety, and he was looking for something maybe to see if it helped.
Okay.
I think that he was probably beginning to experience some, mental health issues about that time.
Okay.
That is a typical time for some of the psychoses,
Right.
some of the mental illnesses that include some psychosis.
Yeah.
So that's possible. And the other thing is, when he was in high school, he was pretty straight-laced. Like, we never caught him drinking. He didn't smoke cigarettes. We'd never smelled weed on him. And those were some things that I asked Tyler, this very good friend of his that he went to high school with. Was some of this going on? Like, were you guys drinking? Were you guys going to parties? And he said no. He said, we didn't do anything in high school. And I almost felt like, I know this is strange to say, but that just knowing Paul, and I can't explain why, that he may have just almost made a decision. Like, once I'm away and I'm in college, I'm going to try it all. I'm going to, enough of this clean boy image, I'm going to give it all a try. Now, that being said, he didn't share that with his roommate, so it couldn't have been so extreme, that he was going to let his best friend know. But I wondered if that was, possible. Yeah. But I have no way of knowing. It's just one of those
I guess what's also on my mind, and I think I've already told you that one of my very, very, very best friends of all time, in fact, I just saw him a few days ago along with his brothers, who also are my very, very best friends. His son is a sophomore at Appalachian State. Coincidentally.
Oh, really?
Yes.
It's Appalachian.
Appalachian. I'm sorry. Look at me. This stupid Pennsylvania, Las Vegas, Florida guy mispronouncing it. But, my perception of the school and that area is, I suppose heroin is everywhere. But how far do you have to go out of your way to find heroin at that school?
At Appalachian.
Yeah, Appalachian before I butcher the name. We're
the only people who know how to say it are the people that live within 100 miles. So I was just teasing you.
That's fine.
You surprisingly did not have to go far out of your way at that time. And I think that's probably even more true now at almost every university and even high schools. Yeah. And, one of the things is that when kids would go through those phases, like when I was that age, you could work yourself out of it. But the thing is, now all street drugs have a high probability of being laced with fentanyl.
Sure.
Like even marijuana. And people, like, kids will say, like, oh, but I know my dealer really well. I really trust this. It's like, you don't know where your dealer got this. So unfortunately, the drugs are becoming stronger and stronger. Heroin is almost like yesterday's marijuana. Yeah. Like, so many kids try it. Yeah. I was shocked.
Okay. All right, well, I will be sure to pass that information on to my best friend so he can look out for his son. Like I said, is a sophomore there now. Okay, so we'll come back to that. We're going to unfortunately have to come back to that topic, but just for a little bit. What about relationships? What kind of relationships, personal relationships, did he have over the years? What can you say about that?
I would say that he had really good, healthy relationships, and a nice amount of friends. He wasn't like one of those people that ran with a great big crowd of friends. He didn't join a fraternity. He didn't, but he did have a small group of friends always during the different stages while he was sober and things were going well. And he had good relationships with us. He get annoyed with us because we're his parents, and he fought with his brother sometimes, and he thought his little sister was annoying. So that means he's normal, right?
Yes. Yes. What about any women in his life? Anything like, and I have to ask, does he, of course he went missing. He's into his 30s. Did he have any kids? Anything along those lines?
Yeah. We don't know of any kids. Okay. And I just say that because I don't know, I don't think so. I don't have any reason to think so, okay. But, we don't know of any kids. His first girlfriend was in college, and they dated for the first, part of his freshman and sophomore year. And I remember she'd come home with him to our home. And so they were pretty tight and everything, but she ended up breaking up with him one time, after he had gone back to school from a break. He texted me and said, she broke up with me, and he was devastated, but I don't think it was a trigger for anything. And then his next relationship was after he'd left school in that third year that I refer to as being the year when things kind of started falling apart. Yeah. He just kind of happened upon somebody else wandering around, and he wandered around with her, and they stayed together for a couple of years, a lot longer. And it was not a good, I feel like it was a very codependent and negative relationship because they were using together.
All right. So they were both very similar in that way.
Yeah.
Addictions and things. And I'm guessing this other young woman who broke up with him was not like that.
I don't think so. I think by then, maybe he was smoking a little weed, and maybe she did too. But I don't think that. In fact, I think I asked his roommate if that girl did have any substance use issues or used with him or broke up with him because of it. And he said no to all of that. He said she didn't even realize.
Okay, so the breakup had nothing to do with that.
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, so let's move back once again to these issues just a little bit. As you just explained a moment ago, that third year of school where everything, began to fall apart. Do you remember the first time you kind of thought, something is going on here with Paul?
Oh, yeah. So it was in that third year, and it was finals week. I'm trying to remember if it was midway through the year or if it was the end of the year. I guess the first semester he hadn't done real well, and I said, and we'd never micromanaged our kids as much as a lot of parents do. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really even ask to see their grades or ask about tests all that often. But then his third year, he was doing very poorly. And I said, I want to see your grades from this term. And he said, well, they haven't all posted yet. Kids tend to get them one class at a time now instead of a report card like we did. Huh. But anyway, as the grades came in, I just kept saying, I want to sit down beside you and have you show me these grades. And they were poor. I don't remember if any of them were failing, but I think there were some D's and maybe an incomplete or, they were not good grades. And so I said, okay, Paul, I don't know what's going on. If you want to come home and go to community college, you can. You're not dropping out of college and continuing to live in Boone. Your college savings are not for you to live someplace else if you're not in school. But you can live at home and go to community college if you want. We're not paying for you to live in Boone and go to Alamance or whatever the community college was there. I don't remember the name. but he said no, he wanted to stay in school. And I said, okay, well, I really want us to check in. I want you to kind of accept that I'm going to want to check in with you more about grades and tests. And I want you to be honest with me about how things are going. And he agreed that he would. And it was just going downhill fast that second semester of the third year.
Okay.
And then the week, like as we were approaching finals, I was feeling like things were really falling apart. And I don't remember the signs of that right now specifically. I just remember things were falling apart. And I was worried that he was going to like oversleep and not go to the final or something. And because he was doing so poorly. And so I think I told him I was going to call and make sure that he was awake, and, you know, went to the final, and I couldn't get a hold of him. And I don't know, I might have even called the police and asked him to do a welfare check. And I kind of felt justified in doing that, because I felt like, okay, he knew how important this was. And if it just turned out he's sleeping because he didn't want to take the test, then he deserves this, you know? But if there's something wrong, you know, I mean, you know, at this point, I still didn't even know he was using. Yeah. But anyway, I felt like he was having a mental breakdown, if anything, you know, like things were unraveling. And so anyways, I don't know if he went to any of his finals. So that's when things were like really bad. And I said, okay, Paul, you need to get yourself awake, and you need to go to the student counseling office and find someone to talk to. And he said he would. And I got in the car and drove up to App because I was worried about him. And I stayed in a hotel and, you know, spent some time with them. And one of my friends said, Anne, does it occur to you that he is maybe using drugs? Wow. And I'm like, gosh, I never even occurred to me. I mean, that must sound so naive and ignorant. But that is, like his roommate said, you know, if you think, you know, don't beat yourself up. I lived with him and didn't know. Like his roommate had just kind of figured it all out in the weeks preceding that. His roommate did not call me and tell me. I actually called his roommate and said, you know, could you be honest with me about this? And he told me the truth when I asked, but he didn't call me and tell me. I called his roommate's mom because I knew her, and I said, had he been telling you a lot about this? Did you know any about this? She said, I didn't know anything about this, Anne. I can't believe that. I just cannot believe that about Paul. So I know it sounds, like I say, I know it sounds naive, and people may be thinking like, lady, you had some blinders on about your kid. It just seems like it wasn't obvious. It really wasn't obvious until things got really bad. So then when a friend said, you know, do you think you might be using? I'm like, you know what? I just like didn't even think about it. And she said, go to the drugstore. You can buy a drug kit and ask him if he'll test. And I think he said he would, sure, no problem. And then he came out of the bathroom and said he didn't have to pee yet. And I said, okay, we'll just drink some water and we'll sit around and wait. And I think he eventually did. And it was positive for so many things. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, I talked to him, confronted him at this point, obviously. And he's like, I'm going to do what I want. I'm not going to. I said, what did the counselor say? And he said, they said I should take a break from school and just live up here for a while.
How convenient.
Yeah, and I said, well, that's not what your college savings are for. You know, you need to come home with us, and we need to get you in a program or something, Paul. You know, and he was just adamant. He said, if I go, I'm not using anymore. That was from a week ago or whatever. He tried those kind of lines. Yep. And if you make me go back to Wake Forest, I will start using, which he never acted like he hated home or us before. That was the first time he said something like that like returning to Wake Forest would be so horrible. So I continued to try to persuade him to come back with me, and he refused. And I said, okay, I'm going to continue to keep I'm going to let you keep the credit card that we've been letting you use for college expenses. I said, this can be used to buy a train or bus ticket home.
Yeah.
Mental health or health related expenses, or food from a grocery store. If I see any other expenditures other than that, if I see cigarettes at a gas station or liquor or any of that kind of stuff, the card, it was, he was an authorized user. I'm like, then I'm cutting it off. But for now, I will do that. However, we're moving you out of your apartment. I mean, I had arrived with a truck, and I said, you are having the rug pulled out from under you, Paul.
Yeah.
I had heard so many stories about enabling, and I was just so determined to not do that, because I'd seen so many stories and heard so many things about how much worse that made things. And so I said, this is it. We are packing your stuff up and you're moving out of this apartment. We will continue to pay for it because you have a lease. We'll look for someone to sublet, but you're not living here. That's not what your college money is going to be used for. And so we basically really did just put them on the streets. And I feel a lot of guilt about that, because everyone else that I knew that had gone through this, they didn't pull the rug out right away. They gave him chances and chances and chances over and over and over, and enabled and enabled and enabled. And I had convinced myself that I would never do that, because that would make things so much worse. But then later, I saw some kids that did have a drug habit in college, and their parents covered up for them and lied about it and paid their way out of all these problems, and they ended up okay. And so then I felt like, well, maybe that's what I should have done.
I don't know, Ann. Having done this for 9 years, I'm surely not a drug counselor, but we talk about drugs a lot on Unfound, and my insight is there's no perfect way. There's no sure way for anything, when it comes to things like this. So I would tell you that if you're looking hindsight 2020, I don't think you can do that. I don't think that's fair to you. For your well-being and everything else. There's no perfect way. There are just choices at that point. There are no good choices, and it really comes down to the person who has the problem. Whether they, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that because you went very hard on them, that this then eventually made it worse or caused this disappearance. I want you to know I don't think you should think like that. Okay, I hope you don't. Whatever these other people did. And if they threw all this money at it, and if these kids, were eventually worked, I don't know. I know, of course, a bunch of people who tried that and it didn't work. So, I know you have some guilt here, but I would, like I said, my search is doing this 9 years, talking to many people, many women, many mothers like yourself. There's no perfect answer here.
Right, and I know that. There's just like I never knew anybody else that just pulled the rug out from under them right away. Like I just never, because it just seemed like everyone else that I'd ever experienced had to go through this period of just trying to fix it by, like I said, like the cover-ups and the money and the buying their way out of trouble and stuff. But and I didn't do it, Okay. I just wouldn't do it. But anyway, it didn't take very long. And actually, I went to a counselor that, like, in Boone, like, while I was there, and I told him, this is what's going on, help me. I didn't realize at that time that there really isn't a whole lot of help out there. There's meetings, and 12-step programs and counselors, but there really isn't. No. Like, I guess I was looking for suggestions of solutions, and that's what nobody is really going to give you other than don't enable them. That's the thing you'll hear the most. Don't enable it. So anyway, we just kind of sat. So now he's basically homeless. He's couch surfing and finding places to stay. And the counselor said, well, he can do that for a while, but eventually people are going to get sick of him and he is going to be homeless. And, it has its way of working out, one way or the other. So just ride it out. Don't, if he doesn't want to go home with you and accept your help, there's nothing you can do. So I left him there, which was hard, but I didn't have any choice. And it was only about 6 months later, I think, that he had gotten a room. He had gotten an apartment with the girl that he had been hanging around with, who was also had substance use issues, and she had 2 other girls that she was rooming with. So it was like a 3-bedroom place. Paul and his girlfriend were in a bedroom, and then the other 2 girls were in the bedroom. And he was sitting outside smoking a cigarette on the deck one sunny afternoon, and some car pulled up, and the guy got out and was super friendly, and he said, "Hey, how you doing?" And it was a bust, and it was a pretty big bust.
Wow.
And so he called us from jail, and I'd kind of like, I don't know that I would say I was prepared for that, but I absolutely thought this was one of the things that could happen. And actually, my husband talked to him. I was in bed, but I heard the phone ring, and I had a feeling just from hearing the other end of Steve's conversation a little bit. And he came in and he said, "Well, Paul's in jail. They got arrested." And I said, "Okay, he can stay there. And I'll figure out what to do tomorrow morning. I'm not driving up, and I'm not bailing him out." And the bond wasn't really all that crazy. So I did, the next day, I called an attorney, and he said, "Well, do you want me to go get your kid out of jail?" And I said, "Well, I only want my kid to get out of jail if I can get him to go into a program.
Right.
But no, I don't want to just get him out of jail and have him, rinse, continue, redo."
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, we can do that. That's called the bond reduction. So basically, instead of, paying the bond amount, he'll make a commitment to go to a rehab. Now he has to stay in the rehab. He's got to complete the program, or else he goes back to jail and the bond is reset. But he'll be ready to go to rehab by now." And I said, "I don't think so. You don't know Paul, And he said, "You don't know what someone's like after they have had to detox cold turkey in a jail cell for a couple of days." He said, "I think he'll agree." And he said, "You line up the rehab." And at that time, you could get insurance companies to cover that, even if it was like a first time. Nowadays, they would be like, "Oh, have you gone to 12-step meetings for 6 years and overdosed 3 times and been in and out?" It's really hard to get that insurance coverage now. But at that time, it was easy. Our insurance approved it immediately. And the attorney went in and talked to him and said, "Talk to your mom. Here's the deal. You can either stay in jail and work this out yourself, or you can, they've arranged to rehab for you." And he said, "I'll go to rehab." So the attorney said he was just absolutely like desperate. And he said he just was done. He wanted to get out from under this. So he went to a really good rehab, and he completed that program. He did very well. He lived in a halfway house with some other guys, or some sort of I'm sober living house. I'm not sure what it was called. And he came home to our home, and things were going well. And then the girlfriend finished her program at a state-funded facility. I'm not saying that wasn't a good program. I don't really know. I just know she had to wait to get in, and Paul didn't. So it was a little bit longer before she was out. And then almost the same weekend that the first weekend that they were together, they relapsed together.
Yep. Common, very common.
Yep.
Very, very common.
So people, places, and things.
So what did he do over the next year? Was he able to get a job? What was he doing? Did he go back to jail over the next several years? How did this go? This roller coaster, I guess.
So that would have been, I don't know, how old is a kid in what would have been their 4th year of college?
22.
22. Yeah, maybe 22. So he came home, and he did live with us for a while. We never kicked him out. we never told him he had to leave. He would find it was tense and it was difficult, and we knew that he was using, but we never kicked him out. Because we knew that Paul was much more likely to leave on his own, and that is what ended up happening. And I think that was when he got on his bike. I think it was really hard on him. I do think that guilt and shame played a big part in a lot of his decisions along this journey. I think it killed him to know what he was doing to us, even though he couldn't stop or take the steps to get the help he needed to stop. He got on his bike and he just left. And he actually got in the room, I think, with the girl in our area for a little bit. And I think they were behind on rent. And I think Paul was on probation at that point because of the charges from when he was in Boone. And he had a violation, and he just didn't want to go back and face it. So he got on his bike and he started riding, which was kind of his thing. Like we were saying, Paul kind of just wants to run away from his problems. He got on his bike, he started riding. And again, these are things you can't do usually when you're using. So he would go through these periods of, like healthy exercise and stuff. Different times he started running. But anyway, so he got on his bike, he started riding south, and he met some guy. Somebody wanted to introduce him to this friend who turned out to be, I say an older gentleman. I mean, I think at that time he was in his 70s, so he wasn't like old. I'm almost there. But maybe 75. And the guy had a partner who was an alcoholic. And the guy, his name was Roger. It's easier for me to just use their names. So Roger's partner, Bob, was an alcoholic, and Roger was an enabler, but he just didn't know what to do about Bob, and it drove him crazy. But they'd been together for so long, he wasn't going to kick him out. And he loved having Paul there to like babysit for Bob and keep Bob occupied. And I think Paul might have even gotten Bob to go to some meetings for a while. Paul did a lot of cooking for him. He loves to cook, did a lot of odd jobs around the house, and they just loved having him, And then Paul started using again, and Paul had gotten a job there at a restaurant, at a nice restaurant doing prep. And Roger even let him use his mother's knives, which had been a, very special set. And those were Paul's prep knives at the restaurant. And then Paul told us that he was there. Once he reached South Carolina, he told us where he was, and we did communicate from time to time. We didn't stay in a lot of contact, but we did communicate. And I ended up communicating with Roger. I don't remember if Paul gave me the number or how that worked, but I would check in with Roger. And then when Roger said Paul's using again, and then things apparently went south in a hurry. And then Roger called me like, you got to do something about him. Kind of like, you're the one that took him in, Right. I'm sure that mom can do a whole lot. But I guess I talked to Paul and said, Roger, you're going to have to ask him to leave. If I were in your position, I would ask him to leave. It's, he's stealing drugs from you. He's using in your home. You need to ask him to leave. I can't make him leave your home. And Roger's kind of, I guess you're right. And so he tells Paul that he's going to have to leave, but that his mom will come and get him and take him to rehab if he's willing to do that. And Paul called me and said, I want to go to rehab. I was surprised because I thought he would have rather been homeless, but he went to rehab. He did really well. They considered him a leader and said he, just did great, but it wasn't long after he got out. He reconnected with that same girl. Yep,
rehab, it just doesn't stick.
Exactly. And it's hard anyway. I mean, it's not unusual for people to try 6 or 7 times in rehab. So anyway, then he and the girl got on their bikes. He bought her a bike. She was living in Pennsylvania at the time. He bought her a ticket. Paul was very thrifty, and he always had money. We weren't funding him, And that credit card had been long gone. The one that I told him he could use for a bus ticket. Yes. That didn't continue long at all. So he was just always able to do enough odd jobs, or like he'd been working in that restaurant. And he's super thrifty. He just didn't spend his last dime usually. So he had enough money to buy her a ticket to come from Pennsylvania to North Carolina and buy her a bicycle. He still had a bicycle. And they decided I think they probably decided they were going to ride their bikes across the country. But then I think when they and this is just me guessing, I think when they reached Colorado and weed was legal, it just got so comfortable to stay. So, and then Paul went off the rails again, and apparently he was drinking really heavily, and I don't know if they were using opiates. I suspect they were. And she finally left him, and she said he was, he wasn't stable. Like, he was very mentally unwell. But again, chicken and egg, are these substances pickling his brain and causing this, or does he have a significant mental illness that also could have contributed to him using?
Right. And which came first?
Yep. No one will ever know. I mean, it really is an academic question. People can tell you that it's one thing or the other, but I would never believe somebody that thought they knew.
Did he eventually make it the whole way across the United States or not?
Well, not that time.
Okay.
And then he was in Colorado. She left Colorado, and he stayed for a year and a half, maybe 2 years total. And I mostly kept up. He kept up with us a little bit. He would get a new phone, and call occasionally and let me know where he was. At this point, since he was living among the homeless for the most part, he was having charges for what they sometimes refer to as crimes of homelessness, which are often like trespassing. And I thought I'd see trespassing charges and I'd think, like, Paul, he went in someone's house or yard. That means going into a convenience store to stay warm and being asked to leave, but not leaving. That's trespassing. And it is a common crime of homelessness because there's no place to go when they're cold. So a lot of the charges, they were small like that. They were trespassing. There was some shoplifting. He stole a sandwich one time and somebody threw him to the ground and put him in a neck hold. And they took him to jail. That's fine. He broke the law. He admit, and he says, I know I stole, but it was pretty harsh. The guy could have killed me. But I stole. I get it. I bought it. I was hungry. I took a Cuban sandwich. So anyway, I would see those things in the public records. And at that time also, it was easier to find those things. It's not as easy for me to find those things anymore. I don't really know why. But anyway, it was public record. And that's kind of how I kept up with where he was. Things are getting worse and worse. A lot of his charges were also failure to appear because they get arrested for loitering or trespassing, and then they get a court date, and then they don't go to the court date. So then the next time they get stopped for something, they have the added charge of, failing to appear for that. And I can't remember what they call it then, but they were just kind of stacking up, but none of those were very serious. And then he was mostly living with homeless people. Somebody would get an opportunity to live in a tractor trailer for a while, and a bunch of them would pile in there to stay warm. Colorado's cold in the winter, and it can be hot in the summer.
It can, yes.
So anyway, at some point, I ended up going out to Colorado. You might be noticing a little bit of persistence in this mama who doesn't give up easily. I might be one who is trying to not enable, but I am not one to walk away from my kid either, if I think he's in danger. And so I went out to Colorado a couple of times just to try to find him, and I posted signs, and I walked down the Platte River where most of the homeless people lived at that time, and it's a dangerous place where I was told you should not go. But it turns out that homeless people aren't anything to be afraid of. I mean, they want kindness and a smile. And so I would just make sure I had a whole lot of $1 bills and several packs of cigarettes and my flyers. And I'd stop and talk to them about Paul. As soon as I pulled out a cigarette, they wanted to stop and talk. So they'd smoke a cigarette. They'd say, you have a lighter? And I'd say, no, I don't smoke. They kind of laughed, like, why are you walking around with cigarettes? But that became an easy way for me to get people to stop and talk to me that otherwise wouldn't have probably stopped and talked to me. And I give them a couple bucks, you know. And so anyway, I did meet people that recognized him. And so I did feel like he was still alive. I met someone who told me he was dead and that the such and such gang had killed him or had found him. And as horrible as that sounds, I actually didn't believe her because I had just called the coroner's office like that day because I called from time to, you know, called every couple of days and asked if they had any missing persons or unidentified remains. So I didn't really believe her. And it turned out not to be true. And I didn't find him that time. But I kept the signs posted, and I would still get phone calls occasionally. I went back to North Carolina, and this one person called me. Her name is Lori, and she said, I am a train driver for the light rail, and I think I've seen your son on, you know, she's like, I don't want to get your hopes up too high. She said, I want to tell you that I've been in this situation, and my daughter is now sober and with us, but we experience a lot of what you're going through. So I don't want to get your hopes up, but I'm pretty sure I see him at this same intersection, but I'm driving the train, and I'm not allowed to look at my phone. I mean, I can't touch my phone. I can't take a picture of him. I can't stop the train. But on my day off, I'm going to go downtown and take a picture of this guy without him noticing. I'm going to send it to you because I think it's your son. Okay. And she did, and it wasn't Paul. I mean, I knew immediately it wasn't Paul. But the interesting thing was this friend, Lori, I mean, I became good friends with her, I sent her so many pictures of Paul that she began to really, really know what Paul looked like. It wasn't just from the one photo like she had seen originally. And one day, it was actually on my birthday, and the day that I was driving or moving my littlest one into the dorm for 1 year, and she called me and she said, you're never going to believe who I just saw. She said, I was driving to work, and it was the last day for me to drive to that remote parking or that parking because they were changing my route. So it's the last day that I was going to be driving that way on my way to work. And I looked over to the right, and I saw Paul at the gas station. And she said, I turned the car around, and I drove up, and I parked, and I said, hey, Paul. And he said, hey, like he was supposed to know me. Yes. And, you know, that thing you do. And she said, how are you doing? And he said, hey, I'm doing okay. How about you? And she said, you know, I don't know if you know me, but I'm a friend of your mom's. My name's Lori. And do you mind if I take a selfie of the two of us so I can send it to your mom? And he said, okay. And she sent me a selfie of her with him. Wow. And she offered to try to buy him breakfast or to go in and get him something from the store. He said, no, that's okay. I don't need anything. And he kind of scuttled away. But I knew he was alive. And what I also knew is that a whole lot better than posting one picture, the same picture over and over of your missing person, you know, on utility poles or distributing flyers with that same picture, giving someone a whole lot of pictures to see, you know, different hair lengths, different angles, different ages, expressions, you know, that builds a different kind of memory, I think, that enabled her to recognize him. Mm-hmm. Like, absolutely, she recognized him. Like, she knew when she saw him that it was him. And she was right. It was. So anyway, that still didn't score me bringing my son back home. But I knew he was alive. And I kind of continued to follow him in Colorado area. And then at one point there was a bigger charge. It was a drug charge. And I knew that they would just release him on his own recognizances because it wasn't that big of a charge. And so I called the DA's office. I called the clerk's office. I called whoever I could call and say, who can I talk to ask that the judge not release him? I know it's up to the judge. You know, I know he's not somebody that they really are going to want to keep in jail. He's a really super polite, nice kid who doesn't look scary. he's got some tattoos, but he's not the scary looking to a lot of people. He doesn't fit into that profile. So he fits on this other profile of we'll just let him go because he looks nice, So they were always just letting him go. And I said, I don't want him to be let go. And they let him go. But I made a relationship with a clerk, I think it was a clerk, and I said, the next time I see that he is in jail, that he comes through your system, I'm going to call you again, and I'm going to ask you again if you will talk to the judge. I'm going to keep trying this over and over again. And she actually said, and I'm going to keep a watch out for him, and I'm going to notice the next time he comes through our system, and I'm going to try too. And so that was really cool. And then the next time I saw in the public records that he'd been arrested, and I called her because I was going to use her, goodwill for this, hope to keep him there until I could get there and figure something out. She was on vacation. And so they let him out like they always do. And then the next time he came through the system, so it took a while and a lot of persistence. We caught it again. I called her and she said, I've already talked to the judge. And so the judge actually, he didn't lie, but he implied to Paul that he had a choice, that he could either stay in jail and figure out how to make bond, that he wasn't releasing him, or he could agree to a mental health evaluation, which is one of the things that I had been trying to get them to do anytime he was behind bars, but they never kept him behind bars long enough for me to do that. So anyway, Paul agreed to a mental health assessment, and they went to the jail and they did a mental health assessment, and they recommended that he go inpatient into a mental health facility, and the judge absolutely let him go without any problem. And I flew in and I talked to the DA, and I was basically like, hey, I'll tell you what, I'll get him out of your state so he's no longer a problem for you if you'll let him, if you'll release these charges, but you have to promise me you don't drop these charges until I tell you I've landed in North Carolina, because there's so many things can go wrong between now and then. And so anyway, he said, sure, he's not a big fish for us. And if he's got a mother and a family that cares about him, we don't need him here. You take care of him. So I bought a return ticket. I took him to the DMV to get a replacement license, because got to have that, of course, to fly. And he'd lost his license. He did have he had a North Carolina state ID, I think is what it was. So anyway, we did get a replacement for that, or the license, whichever it was. And I flew him home, and when we touched ground at RDU, I called the DA and said, okay, go ahead and drop the charges. So that was how I got him home that time. So now we're, let's say, at age, 26 or so. Maybe.
We're still a little way from the disappearance date. Why don't we move up to his trip? He gets sober and he goes on the next bicycle trip.
Okay, so
can we move up to then? Yes, please.
It would make sense in your timeline for me, and I can try to shorten some of these things, but at that time, when he came back from North Carolina or to Colorado, it took a while for the cobwebs to clear. He got some mental health assistance, and then he got a job, and that job lasted 3 years. So he was sober and did well during that 3-year period. Mm-hmm. And then the second and third year of that job, his crew was working in Charlottesville, West Virginia, and he loved it up there. And they were paying for the apartment. They were giving him $250 a week food stipend, no utilities. He just was like banking every check, and he loved it. That ended, and the crew got sent back to Durham, and that's when he decided to do the bike trip, because he decided it's not worth it for me to work for that money without the housing and the food stipend and all that. So that's when he decided he wanted to do this bucket list thing, and then he would explore different job options.
In those 3 years of him being sober, what did you talk to him about his times being homeless? What did he say about how, of course he's an addict, but did you talk to him about those years? And, what did he say about those years? And
so I certainly tried, and he really didn't want to talk about it. He would sometimes volunteer stories, but they were usually sort of funny or animated or clever stories about some of the people he was with or some things that had happened. But he usually really wouldn't like stay in a conversation that was about the meat of the problem of the mental illness. And even when he was under treatment at Chapel Hill for mental illness, and he was going every week, and he was doing a lot of programs and stuff, he really didn't want to talk about it. He ended up actually being assigned something called an ACT team. So it's ACT and then team, and that stands for Assertive Community Treatment. That's the highest level of care before inpatient. So he was definitely diagnosed as having pretty significant mental health needs. And when you're on an ACT team, those team members actually come to your house, like a nurse practitioner, a therapist, a behavioral health specialist, a psychiatrist. Like they basically make house calls like twice a week. Someone comes to the house to work with you. And that was, I think, a really, really good model for us because he wouldn't talk with me. He didn't want to talk with me about it. It was just kind of an off limits thing. So at least he had this ACT team where he did kind of have to talk a little bit. But I'm still not sure how much he opened up about that. During that 3 years, there actually, when he was sober and did really well at work, and he was, his boss's favorite worker and all of that, he actually did have one mental health or, decompensation or substance use, episode. We're not really sure which. And he did end up inpatient in a mental health facility. And his boss was amazing. He was like, we just want Paul to get better. And if he's better and he wants to work, I want him back. I mean, he's my best worker. He has been so dependable. But I understand if it's too much for him too. So anyway, Paul did go back to work. And then he did great. So I guess we'd reached a point where when there was a mental health decompensation or a relapse, it was getting shorter. So anyway, he wraps up that job in Charlottesville, comes back and lives with us for a while. He's not sure what he wants to do. He's pretty sure he doesn't want to go back to Mid-Atlantic infrastructure. So that's when he decides to do the big bucket list thing, the bike trip.
Let's talk about that bike trip. Who did he go with?
Pardon?
Who did he go with? By himself?
He started the trip himself.
Wow.
Have you ever heard of it, this Trans-American Bicycle Route?
Yes, but I knew nothing about it other than that I've heard of it.
Okay, so for your viewers, it's a little bit like the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Northwest Coast Trail or whatever that one's called, but it's actually small highways and byways that are safe places for bicycles to ride. And it's just a route. It's not like a dedicated path. So you're following directions, or usually you get these maps that you can either put on your phone or you can get paper copies. And you're just riding from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast.
Wow.
It starts in Norfolk, Virginia, and although we live in Durham, which isn't far, and he could have started there, he didn't. He said he needed to start in Norfolk so he could say he'd done the whole thing. So Steve drove him up to Norfolk with his bike, and he hopped on his bike and rode off. It's also very cool that there are a lot of kind of like hostels and different places to stay that are identified on the maps. And there are motels, mostly not big hotels, but small motels. And there are churches that open their church basement or something to these folks that ride. There's fire stations that open space for these people. Sometimes he camped. It's just a very interesting, route, and you meet some interesting people. And he started the route, and he took a sketchbook or like watercolor paper, that kind of book, and he was doing paintings like at all of his sleepover places, and we were staying in close contact with him. It just looked amazing. And to think of somebody that could just there was no training involved with this either. You know, there really wasn't much planning. This is like Paul Holmes just can like jump on his bike and go, you know.
Yeah.
So he was loving it, and then and we were loving following the tracker and hearing the experiences and seeing photographs of his paintings. They were small. It was like more like a 5x8 size paint book, I guess. And then sure enough, it happened again. The tracker went dead in Pueblo, Colorado, and my mom alarm went off, and I got on a plane and I flew to Pueblo, and I asked the police for help and told them the last place the tracker had been, and they wouldn't help me. They said, "Ma'am, on a scale of 1 to 10, your kid being missing in Pueblo is about a 1 or a 2. Yeah. We got a lot bigger problems here."
Yeah.
It is a really, really rough drug town.
Yeah.
But it was still pretty hard to hear that I wasn't going to get any help from law enforcement for someone who was missing. So I rode to the last address where we'd gotten a ping, and it was this just terrible looking house that, you know, was half falling down. It had a fence around it, but like a privacy fence, but that was falling apart, and the gate wasn't closed or anything, and the yard was just dirt, like mud. And I walked around the house. I didn't knock on the door the first time. And again, I just do this. Yeah, it's not smart. Listeners, don't do what I do.
Yes. Me and the listeners and guests have had this conversation before. Yes, there's certain things that some guests do that I would never recommend. Yes.
Yes, exactly. And you might want to keep saying that over and over.
Okay.
Recommend what Ann does. I went in the backyard and I saw his bike, and I took it and wheeled it over to my rental car, and I threw it in the back. And then the next day I went back there, braver. I asked again for help from the police, and I told them that if they didn't come help me, I was going to be knocking on the door of this house that looked like a very dangerous place, and they wouldn't help me. So I went, and there were people sitting outside that time, and I told them what had happened, and they said, "Yeah, Paul, I think he's down by the river or something," or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, "Well, I need his stuff, and I think it's in the house." And they're like, "Well, I don't think we have any of his stuff." And I'm like, "I want you to go in the house and find his stuff, or I'm coming in the house and finding his stuff." Mm-hmm. And they went in the house, and they did bring some things, but they didn't bring everything. The thing that hurt the most is I never got that painting book back.
Wow.
It was among some things that they just didn't give me back for whatever reason. And I kept telling them, I really want that painting book. You know, they gave me the GPS tracker. Of course, they didn't give me the iPad. I can't remember. They kept some of the stuff. But so anyway, then I was like trying to figure out how I'm going to find him, because I know I'm not going to get any help, but I'm going to find him. And they told me that he was probably down by the river, but that I shouldn't go down by the river. That was really dangerous. And of course, I'm thinking, I'll probably be going down by the river. I'll wait till it's I've got more daylight, or I'll find somebody to go down there with me. And I was sitting in a Hardee's, and my phone rang, and it was Paul.
Wow.
And I said, "Paul, what's going on? Are you okay?" And he's like, "Well, no, not really. I'm having trouble. And so I went to a mental health place, and they're going to help me out." And I said, how did you know I was here? And he's like, "You're here?" Because of course, our phones are still with us, And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm here. I was looking for you." And he's like, "You came here?" And again, I think that those things that I did, I think did bolster him, to know that, we're not giving up on you.
Mm-hmm.
We're always going to try to find you and bring you home. And so anyway, he said, I'm going to check into a facility. So he stayed inpatient for, I don't know, about a week. I was fortunate. I had a friend who lived in Denver, so I stayed with her for that week. And then when if I found this a really nice guy that said, "I'll lock his bike up behind the house," because I don't remember how I was going to return that car. I don't remember. But anyway, I didn't want to take the bike up there. And so I found this nice guy. And he's like, I'll lock it up on our back porch. And, I said, okay, I'll go buy a bike lock. He said, we got extra bike locks. And he gave me the combination and said, if I'm not here and you want it, just super nice people sometimes, and so anyway, he stayed inpatient for a week or so or whatever. And then when he was ready to discharge, I got a hotel room and he spent the night in the hotel room. And I think he fully expected me to drag him back to Durham. And I felt like, as hard as it was, I wanted him to be able to finish that dream if it's what he wanted to do. And I felt like if he goes back to Durham, he's just going to be more depressed that he failed. He didn't reach his dream and all that. He didn't accomplish this thing he wanted to do. And so, and it wasn't like he's going to do this with or without my blessing. It was probably more likely that if I didn't give him my blessing, that he would have come home with me. So anyway, I said, Paul, if you want to do this, there's no reason you can't do this. And he hopped on his bike the next day and rode to Astoria, Oregon. On the second part of the trip, he met up with some people that he ended up staying with. Like the first part of the journey, he would meet up with people and maybe do a ride with them for a day. But he met up with 3 other people eventually. There was a group of 4 of them, and they all finished in Oregon together. They didn't all join the same time, but they spent most of that ride together with those folks. And I know that helped a lot. They went out to eat together and they stayed at the same, fire station or cheap motel or whatever. And when they got to Oregon, they stayed in a youth hostel or something and, decided to stay for a week. I really had this horrible gut feeling that part of wanting to do this was going to be him ending with taking his life when he reached Oregon. Wow. And, I hate to say it, but it was just there, that feeling. And so I really wondered, like, if he did make it, if he would do that, because he just didn't know what else. He didn't know what to do. When he decided to leave that job, he just clearly didn't know what to do. And wasn't looking and feeling very emotionally healthy until he got on his bike and started riding. Running and riding were 2 things that cleared his head the best, probably. So anyway, something did happen in Oregon. I don't know what, but I do believe that something happened. He called me from somebody else's cell phone and said, I went down to the river for a swim and someone stole my pants and my phone and my driver's license and everything, my debit card were all in there. So I don't think I'm going to be able to come back to Chicago. We had decided to go visit some friends in Chicago, family and friends, and then the plan was he was going to take Amtrak back to Chicago, just sell his bike or give it away or something. It wasn't even an expensive bike. Like, he can get by on really minimalist or really low-end equipment. So anyway, that just was like, okay, that seems really strange. That just seemed really strange. Yep. Like somebody's, so, and again, it
a little
just
too convenient or something. A little too pat a story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I said, well, Paul, if you want to come to Chicago, we'll figure it out. I'll figure out a way to buy you a ticket. Well, I'll figure out some place that I can fax or send an email copy of your driver's license. They can, for your ID for the train. And he's like, okay, and so I did. And we met him at Union Station in Chicago, a couple of days later. So, which was very cool in a way that, he got to ride his bicycle across the whole country and see all those different cities and states slowly, riding. I mean, at a cyclist pace.
No, I can't imagine it. Nope.
And then hop on a train and see the same thing in a lot more comfort and fast. Obviously not exactly the same route, but trains often take you through, more picturesque rides than autos. And he loved trains. So that was kind of cool. He stayed in Chicago with us a few days. I felt like something was very, very off. And then we road tripped back to North Carolina. And from that point, now we are getting close to the disappearance. Yeah. And I think there were 2 overdoses in that short time. He was definitely using, again, we never kicked him out. We never told him to leave. We always encouraged him to get help. He never stole from us, which is really odd. Like you never hear that. Like you always hear these stories, like, he stole this, he stole this and took it to the pawn shop. He stole food when he was hungry. But he didn't steal from us ever. Which is just an interesting, I don't know, a different characteristic from many, many addicts, most addicts, I'm going to venture to say, that of families I've talked to. So anyway, but things are very different. Something was wrong. He was clearly very depressed. And we just kind of gave him the space. I didn't pressure him about, like, well, what kind of, you got to get a job. You can't just like live without getting a job. We just kind of like, you can stay here, hoping again that something would happen and we would be able to get him to get help. And the day he left, it was just a normal day. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon. It was October 29th, and I wasn't at home, and my husband was at home, and I doubt if Paul even said goodbye or I'm going for a walk. He went for lots of walks. And a few hours later, after I got home, I said, "Do you know where Paul is?" And he said, I think he went for a walk. And I checked his bank statement, or his bank account, and saw that he had withdrawn $200 from a convenience store that's only a half a mile north of us, and it's got a very bad reputation for drugs. So I went to the convenience store and asked if they had surveillance camera or if anybody had seen him. I showed pictures and everything and talked to some of the drug people outside and the people inside that worked. There was a woman in there and she was like, "Oh yeah, I know him. That's Paul. He is the nicest guy. Man, he's polite. You raised him right." I would always hear that. He's so polite. And so, but he wasn't there. Nobody gave me any information about where he might have been. So then they told me, whoever was working told me to come back at a certain time when the owner was there. And so it was after dark, so I went in with my husband, and the owner looked through the surveillance camera, and we saw Paul, doing the cash withdrawal and making what was, clearly a drug deal. He basically, he was told to wait behind a particular utility pole where you couldn't really see him very well on the camera. And then eventually some girl walked up and she did an exchange with somebody else. And then they told him to go to another place. And, there was things being exchanged. I mean, I couldn't see it, right? I couldn't see money or drugs, but it was pretty clear. And then we noted what direction that he walked off in. And so we said, I didn't. So that was the day that he went missing.
I should jump in here. And what's interesting to me about this is that, of course, before this, he'd been clean for 3 years. And in fact, is in the where he was employed, he was seen as being one of the best employees. And that was not in your area, right? That was not in Durham. That was somewhere else.
He worked in Durham for that company for a year, and he was a great employee there. Yeah. He worked in Charlottesville, West Virginia for 2 years and maintained that good reputation. Now, there was a relapse in the middle of it.
Okay, but where I'm going with this is, so he's gone essentially for 2 years out of the area, clean, seemingly, I mean, to the point enough that he could be considered a great employee. He then goes on this bike ride. Yes, he has some issues there, but he's not in Durham. But immediately he comes back to Durham and somehow, seemingly within no time, can find a heroin dealer. Like, snap of the fingers.
Right. And it's, probably tied in with that person, place, and thing that you just can't go back to. It's possible. Yeah. Like, Durham is just going to always be a trigger place.
Okay, so he's been out of doing drugs in the Durham area for quite a long time. He comes back and boom, he's right back in it. Like no problem.
Correct.
Very quickly. Correct. Okay. Just want to make sure I understood that. Please continue. So you see him on video. You see him with, I guess, maybe a couple different people on that particular day. Right. And he doesn't come home, but do you see the direction he walks off in? Is there a possibility he got picked up by a car? What do you know?
So actually, anything was possible. He walked off and he went east on the Club Boulevard, I think it was, or maybe in a different street. I can't remember. But anyway, so the next day I didn't file a police report until the next morning after he went missing. It was less than 24 hours. I went down to the police station and I filed a police report. So that day was kind of busy with that, but we did go out on foot as well. And I had friends, and we made some flyers really fast, and we posted them, and we walked and talked to people and looked, So I guess one mistake that I made, and I'll mention this just so that other people don't make the same mistake. And it wasn't a big mistake. I don't think it was a mistake that mattered in this particular case, but I was eager that this police report be made. So I went to the police station to do it. And I ended up with a kind of a young cop who didn't promptly file it. So the police report it appears that the police report isn't technically filed until November 1.
Okay.
Anyway, it was,
gotcha.
No, I'm sorry.
That's
I've
all
got
right.
my dates mixed up now.
Please continue.
Anyway,
that's fine. Please continue.
The faster and better way to file a missing persons report, I believe, is always to call 911 and an officer will come to your home, which is, or where the person was last identified to be, with the family or whatever. So then I think I would have had a more experienced officer, and it would have, I think this guy was more like a desk guy. And so you'd think that would have been good, but I think it's actually almost always better. My experience has been since that time, and since when the report or the case got assigned to Corporal Winston Hunt, Corporal Hunt always comes to our house. Anytime there's a question, if I have any question, he always comes to our house to see us. If he has any question, he always says, "Can I swing by and see sometime today? I want to talk to you about something or give you some information or something." So anyway, I think it's better to just go ahead and call 911 and have them come out. It might not seem like a 911 emergency, but I think that's the way they prefer it. And I think that the report would have been filed more promptly if I'd done it that way.
Interesting. Okay.
So,
all right. So he's missing, and you file this report, but it doesn't get official until November 1st. What are you doing? What are you personally doing?
So we're walking. We are walking and searching and walking and walking. And we're walking that area that, where we'd seen him walk off. And I'm walking in a lot of brush. I'm thinking it's very possible he could have, bought a lot of heroin. Heroin's cheap now, too. I don't know if you realize how much you can buy for $200, but it's cheap. And he could have easily overdosed. I mean, he overdosed twice in our home. He could have easily overdosed in a secluded area. And so we're looking everywhere off the beaten path. I mean, we're on beaten paths too, and we're talking to a lot of people. And then we go home once it get dark and make more posters. The police officers pretty quickly asked me if I was okay with them releasing that information to, I think it was WRAL News, and I agreed. And they also asked me if I was okay with them putting it on their Facebook page and their Instagram, maybe, or something. There were two, Facebook and something else. But anyway, and I agreed to that as well. And then I also asked them to I guess it was their website maybe, and I asked them to sort of drive it up to the top again, basically repost it after a week or so, because I felt like it had gotten buried, if they put new posts on there, and they were more than happy to do that. Just another suggestion if you're ever faced with something like this. So the police are looking. Officer Hunt was great. I mean, I think that you could always imagine could they have poured more resources into this if he had been a pretty blonde girl with a scholarship to Juilliard? And maybe they would have. And that's really unfortunate that, the amount of attention is, kind of profiled
it's
by...
disproportionate. You're right.
Yeah. But I still think that they really did as much as I would ever have expected. I never felt like I was getting blown off or they weren't listening to me. I felt like they did what they could. In searching and getting, like, the particular officer, they actually, I don't know if it was that they didn't have a missing persons department or if that department was too overflowed. But so his case, the officer that ended up being assigned to his case was actually a homicide.
Yep.
And he was smart. And I liked him, so maybe that was a good thing. I don't know. There were a couple of times that he said, I'm sorry, we had a homicide. I can't come over today. Is it okay if I stop tomorrow? Like if I ask him for help or something. He'd say, I can send somebody else or I can wait.
I have to ask you, during this time, because the listeners should know this is not the last time that Paul was seen. Right. But were the people that he dealt with that day ever identified in those early days?
Well, interestingly, the convenience store owner referred to Paul as white boy, and one of the girls that was very well known to him as black girl. And he said black girl gets the drugs from somebody else and then gives them this. I don't know how it all works. But anyway, So the convenience store owner did recognize this one particular girl, but I don't think he knew her name. And I know the police talked to him. We told the police everything that had happened, and they went over and talked to the owner multiple times. Okay. And so I would guess that the convenience store owner probably said, she's a regular here. One time when I went back, he said, your son is gone and black girl is gone now too. And I said, well, how often did you used to see her? And he said, every day. So that was kind of interesting. And I never really found out more about that. Or if I don't remember. I'm just going to say I don't remember because I probably did ask more than once. And then, if it's okay, I'll move to what
let me just ask you a little bit more about this. So, sure. Do you know if the police ever tracked? So they're there together on October 29th. And then Paul goes missing, and then we're referring to her as Black Girl. She never shows back up at the store after that, even though she was a regular.
That's what the owner implied to me.
Okay. And during that time, up until the next date that we're going to talk about, she was never located.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Now, my other question is, you did tell me, I think that, and the listeners already know what I think about dogs, but being that they were used, I have to ask. Dogs were used to try to track him down at some point in early November. What can you say about that?
Yeah, so that was within a few days of when he went missing. And, the handlers and her partner came out with the dog and started at our house, and we talked, and then we drove over to that location. And we told them, we saw he went east on this side street. I can't remember the name of the street. And she said, you don't even tell us any directions or streets or anything. The dog will decide where to go. And apparently, I don't know if this is true of all search and rescue dogs, but they aren't like well-behaved dogs that heel. They're dogs that have a scent and they follow the scent and drag their owner along, and it's very exhausting.
I would say allegedly, but okay. So
yes, and I do know how you feel about them.
Right.
So they followed a trail, and they gave us they used a GPS tracker or something, so they gave us that map. They said we could go with them, but it would be very exhausting and hard to keep up, and I have some mobility issues, so I declined to go with them. And we did meet up with them at one point. Basically, the scent trail was followed for about, I'm going to guess that it was 1.5 miles through neighborhoods and through a lot of brush and up under an underpass, and then straight back down again, and then it eventually to a neighborhood street that was a dead end, and the dog just kept circling. We were actually with them at that point because we were with them the last bit, and at that point the dog just kind of started going in circles in that area where the dead end street was, that cul-de-sac, and their explanation, and I know you told me this is typically what they will say once the dog does that, is this trail ends here, he was probably picked up in a car.
All right.
But we have no evidence of that. Like you said, you're not a big believer in dogs.
I hear that a lot, and I'm not convinced any of these people, very few of them are picked up. You're, once again, being that I've not been there, you have been there. How far would you say of a walk it is between the store and this location where the dog stopped? How far?
About a mile and a half, I think. Because the trackers, like, they mapped it on it, they gave us a map with a picture of the path that they had taken. And I'm guessing it was a mile and a half. I'm not sure.
Okay. All right, so, of course, they come to a dead end one way or the other. They come to a dead end. And what goes on over the next, let's say, 10 days before we come up to this next date of November 13th? Okay. What are you thinking? What are you doing? What's going on during that time?
A lot of footwork, a lot of posting on our very large neighborhood listserv, letting our friends know and told them to spread the word. I had not yet done Facebook, but just spreading the word that way and putting up more posters. One thing I did that was a little different, and it was well received, and if someone ever finds themselves in this unfortunate situation, I feel like if somebody hands you a flyer that's on a printed on a piece of printer paper, those things for me just tend to end up in the floor of my car, and they get stepped up on and ripped up and thrown away. Yeah. So instead, I made quarter size, like I used cardstock, heavier cardstock, and I printed them 4 to a page, and it had a good picture of Paul. It had a QR code to the Facebook page, so I must have made a Facebook page by then. And is that what it's called? The QR code. And it had, the basic information about who to contact, what to do, and just kept it as simple as I could. And at first people said, well, that's not going to be a big enough picture. And it's like, oh, come on, look at the picture on your phone. That's like the size of your thumbnail, but you recognize that person exactly who it is. Whatever a quarter sheet of an 8.5 by 11 is, trust me, it's big enough, So probably half of that was a photo of Paul, half of it was information. And so when I would meet, I didn't staple those up, but what I would, when I would stop and talk to people, I would give them a stack and ask them if they would, whether I was talking to people that might have been, unhomed, that were living in some of the encampments in Durham, or if I was just talking to people that were walking in the park, I would say, would you mind accepting a stack of these, and you can give them to friends. If they have cars, keeping this in their car where they can just grab it and get a glance at it, and it's less likely to get lost than a full-size sheet of paper. And people love that. And a lot of the phone calls that I did get, people said, I've been carrying this card around in my car for the last year, so I don't know if that's a common thing to do or not. It was, maybe everybody does that, but I don't know. But anyway, that was better received than a full-size flyer as far as giving them to individuals. I also would stand at intersections in traffic, in busy times of traffic, and I would stand where the same kind of little island where somebody might fly a sign, but instead I had a larger picture of Paul, and I had a stack of those things. And if traffic stopped, I would ask them, if I could talk to them, in that split second, and give them a stack of the cards and say, would you share these with people and keep one in your car? So it was a lot of just footwork and not a lot of technology at that point. I guess I must have done, and you know what, that QR code, it might have even just been a link to photos of him. I really can't remember for sure what that was, but I do remember putting a QR code on there.
Let me ask you this. Of course, we're going to get to this November 13th date, but to this day, have you ever tracked down anybody who saw or talked to Paul between October 29th and November 13th, ever?
There were many people who said they did. They were sure. and it was always proven to be not the case.
Mm-hmm.
There were a few cases where I will never know for sure, except for one woman who was in the convenience store the first time I went in, and she said, "Oh, I know him. That's Paul. He's the really polite one. He sits here beside me when I play my video games. I'm kind of addicted." So she knew him, and she had seen him, but no one else after that ever. Lots of people would call or message me and say they thought they had seen him. And I would, go to that location or send the police, or I would beg people to try, if at all possible, to take a picture if it was safe. And it showed me that the pictures were working because people were finding people that looked like Paul. And I didn't know there were that many people that looked like Paul, but I could absolutely see how some of these people that were found, we had one where someone called us and said, "There's this guy in a tent asleep, and I'm sure it's him." Steve and I took the police with me, and it was a different police officer, I guess. And he looked in the tent, and, he'd seen all these pictures, and he said the guy was asleep. And so we didn't want to startle him, didn't know if he was armed or anything. And the police officer looked in there, and he said, "It's him." And we're like, "You're kidding." And this was quite a while. This was more than a year after. Okay. And I'm like, "You're kidding. Like, this is it. Like, what are we going to do here? Wow. But we're still a little afraid to scare him. We didn't know if he was psychotic or, what his reaction was going to be. And so then the police officer said, do you want to see?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I looked at the guy and I said, "I don't think it's Paul," but I wasn't sure. But he looked too tall, even lying down. I wasn't sure. I really wasn't. And my husband looked in, and he's like, "Yeah, I can definitely see how they thought that was Paul, but that's not Paul." Okay. So anyway,
I just want to make sure we go. I just want to make sure we go back to those specific days, of those 14 days roughly. That really, to this day, no proof that anybody saw or talked to him. No. I think this is very important. So we just have to make that clear.
Correct.
Okay. All right, great. But you did your best over those 14 days. Very interesting, different idea regarding the kind of picture you're using, the QR code. Something I don't know if we've ever heard that before on Unfound. Maybe we have, but it's not very common. It's just escaping me, but that seems pretty unique to me. All right, and still not finding him. I mean, what are you thinking overall? Just your general feeling for those 2 weeks.
I was devastated, definitely, and I'll probably cry talking about this. I really felt like, given the fact that he'd had recent overdoses, that I wasn't sure he was going to end his life. He had other suicide attempts, or at least ideation. I really thought the most likely thing was that he was in the brush someplace, overdosed, and his body hadn't been found. And it's amazing, like, you don't have to go deep into the woods to find a place like that. And Paul would have been, if Paul wanted to overdose and die, he would have wanted to do it in a secluded place. He wouldn't have been one that would have wanted to be found. So that was my first gut. And I hated it, and I fought it, and I kept trying to remind myself that I have no more evidence that he's dead than I do that he's alive. I don't have evidence of either. I've got gut feelings, but I don't have anything to prove either. So I have to keep open all of the possibilities that I can think of, and a lot more that I probably haven't thought of was sort of what was going through my mind at the time.
Then what happens on November 13th? Maybe it doesn't exactly happen that day, but something went on, and then you found out about it shortly after. Please explain.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so what happened is I was over at that gas station from time to time. One of your questions, Ed, in some of our notes was like if I thought it was possible that he could have visited Joy Mart, other times in between there.
Sure.
And I did. It's possible. Like, I don't have any way to know for sure. What I would say is that the owner was now familiar with us and said he would always let us know if he saw Paul or if he noticed him when he was going through any videos. Now, he didn't commit to like going through hours of all of his different cameras every day, but I felt like if he had been there when Paul had visited again, that he probably would have let us know. So what happened, and I believe it was November 13th, is the Joy Mart owner called us, or he might have sent me a message. I think he actually used WhatsApp because I remember being frustrated that his messages were set to disappear. Anyway, he made some sort of contact to us that he had seen Paul on video camera. And so we just went over. We just went straight over. Like, I think he sent us a picture, and my husband said, "That's not Paul." And I said, "I actually think it is." And I think he sent us a still shot. So after we saw, and the reason that we didn't think that it looked like Paul very much is normally Paul has long hair. He happened to have gotten his hair cut short a week before he went missing. So he had short hair when he went missing. So we were used to seeing him with that short hair. But something about that grainy photo, it didn't look a lot like him. It was a color picture, but the hair looked blonde, and Paul's hair is definitely strawberry. And the oddest thing was, and this shouldn't have had any kind of influence on us, but he was in clothing that Paul would have never
I remember you saying that,
elected to wear. This guy had on blue jeans, and Paul didn't wear blue jeans. He just always wore one color or another of khaki or green Carhartts. He just never wore blue jeans. And then even more like out of character was the guy had on a sports jersey, like a UNC with a number on it. I don't recall the number offhand. And Paul, I'd never seen Paul in like an athletic team sports kind of jersey ever, But obviously, he left with the clothes on his back, and somebody's going to give him some clothes, or he's going to go to a clothing shelter, a shelter or something, and get some clothes someplace, or to a thrift store. Anyway, it took us a while, and what it really took was watching the video over and over, because in the video, Paul is walking, and Paul doesn't, I wouldn't necessarily call it a limp, but he had a knee injury. He's got some metal in one knee. And I think he actually just kind of got in a little bit of a habit of not completely giving up the limp from that injury at the time. So it's not, and Paul's also just a little pigeon-toed. And it was the walk. It was like, yes, that's 100% Paul. Obviously he has on different clothes, but that's Paul for sure. My husband and I both agreed that it was Paul. And the convenience store manager said, like, "Oh yeah, it's him. I walked outside in the parking lot." Now, I'll give you some more details about that. So what happened is Paul arrives in a Toyota Avalon.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure he was the only one in the car, if I'm remembering correctly. And he gets out of the car and he kind of paces around outside. He doesn't go up to the gas pumps and he doesn't go inside. He just sort of paces around nervously. And I think he goes back to the car a few times. And then another car pulls up. This time it's like a black hatchback, and there's two people in it. There's one driver in the front and there's one person in the back seat. And Paul immediately goes over to this car. The car's just sitting at the gas pump, but they're not pumping gas. And Paul immediately goes over to the car, and there appears to be some sort of a transaction between Paul and the guy in the back seat. I think the guy in the back seat got out because I called one of them Gold Shirt, and then there was another person that had known Paul to have been there like before he went missing, that said, she said she recognized him. I'd forgotten about her. Her name was Yolanda. She didn't know much, but when she saw that photo, she said, "Oh yeah, that's Courtney." Okay. So I gave that information to the police when they looked at the video surveillance and everything, and when they talked to the convenience store owner. Now, nobody else referred to the guy as Courtney, and the police officer said, "Yep, that's Courtney." And he asked for Courtney's last name, and he wouldn't tell me. And I said, so anyway, the officer did go and talk to Courtney, and Courtney just denied. So this is a really hard thing for me, because I feel like, why can't I figure out a way to know Courtney's last name? And why can't, the next time Courtney goes to jail, why can't I see that so I can ask the police to go over there and make a deal with him? Because they let people out of jail all the time for, just whatever. Just like, it doesn't have to be a big deal. Just like, okay, give us some information about Paul. Just tell us what you know and we'll let you out, But I can't figure that out.
All right.
I haven't figured it out. I'm going to talk to the officer about it again. I brought it up before, but not for a while.
Let me just ask you a couple questions. So he pulls up, and it seems he was meeting these people, and he was like a little bit early, so he's there by himself. At least
I'm 90% sure. I'll have to ask. Okay. Well, we won't have another opportunity to revisit this, but I'm going to say I'm 90% sure that. So it's just so strange. Some of the other thoughts are like, what kind of, let's just call this a drug case.
I'm just trying to make sure we understand the video. You're watching the video. He pulls in somebody's car.
Yep.
All right. And he is there. And then another car pulls in.
Yep.
Okay. And how long would you say they were there, a total of minutes?
Paul was probably there at least 5 minutes. I think it probably took that long before the second car pulled up. When the other car pulled up, I don't think it was more than 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay. And your impression from, I'm not a big body language guy, but I'm going to ask anyway. Did you get the impression that Paul knew these people beforehand, or do you think this might have been the first time? Could you tell?
I couldn't tell, but I did just remember one other thing that Yolanda had told me. Mm-hmm. When she saw the video, she said, "Oh my God, I can't believe that Paul did that. Courtney hates white people, and Paul should never have tried to deal with him. He should have Paul should have only been talking to Gold Shirt, the one in the front," which is neither here nor there. I just thought it was interesting that, she said that Courtney would have been really rattled by Paul trying to deal with him.
Okay.
By himself, but I didn't get that body language.
All right, and when they leave, they go in different directions. Could you tell? Was one following the other?
I could tell the direction that the black hatchback went. I could see that on the video. I couldn't see. I don't know if it was that the convenience store guy didn't save enough of the video or whatever, but I couldn't see myself when I looked at it which way the car was going. But the police officer did look through all of the video again, and it might have even been flock cameras that he saw, but anyway, he did see which way the car went. Like, it pulled out of the gas station, it turned right on Avondale Drive or Roxborough Road, and it got on 85 going south. It went up the exit ramp.
And this was during the day?
That's a good question, Ed. Something about me wants me to say that it's either dark or nearly dark.
Okay, so it's not totally obvious.
We can also talk about the license plate.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. Just want to make sure we understand this. What strikes me is that he's missing, quote unquote, missing for 2 weeks, and he chooses to meet somebody only a half mile away from where you live.
Exactly, which I also thought was very strange, that he was willing to ever go back there, since we do live so close.
I agree with you.
Posted so many pictures, and I feel like he had to have known that we were looking for him. It made me think that, my feeling about that was that he was at a point beyond caring and really rationalizing.
I mean, because once again, we have to think, well, what if you're out there that day? Did you drive by? And, granted, it was only a couple minutes, but you could have driven by and said, hey, wait a minute, that's Paul.
Right. And I was going to the store with some frequency just to try again, to ask any of the people, customers, employees, have you seen any more of them, So, there is every chance that I could have happened to have been there. And like you said, it's also a half mile from my house, so I easily could have been driving. So I did think that was strange.
Okay.
I'll tell you what I thought was one of the strangest things. is who would loan Paul Holmes a car.
Well, we're going to get to that. We'll get to the car.
Okay.
We're going to get to the car and the license plate stuff eventually, but let's just move on to what I want to call the rest of the disappearance. Regarding the people in this other vehicle who met Paul, how many people do you believe were in that vehicle?
I believe 2.
All right. And they have been identified. You said one was gold shirt. Have they ever been given names?
The other one was identified as Cameron, and that was by Yolanda. Actually, no, not Cameron. Courtney. She actually called him Corey, and it was a police officer that said that's Courtney, not Corey. But yes, we know him. He's a known, offender.
Okay. What about the other person?
Never got a name or anybody that knew his name.
Do you know if these people have ever been, either one has ever been tracked down? Have they ever been questioned? Being that you say you do talk to the police once in a while, do you know anything about that?
All I know is that the police officer told me that he had talked to Courtney at length and assured him it was a friendly conversation. He said, I kept telling him, you're not in any trouble. We've got a kid that's missing. We've got a family who wants to find him. We just want to know. And I would guess he would have said, we've got video of you with this guy, but the police officer said it was all just deny. Like, I know nothing. I have absolutely
wasn't me. I wasn't there. Not me. Wasn't me. I'm not telling you anything.
Yeah, but I do need to ask, actually Officer Hunt's coming over tomorrow for something, and I do need to ask him if he recalls that, did he show Courtney the video and say, come on, Courtney, what's your explanation for this? And also talk to him a little bit more about if Courtney's in jail, and if I could just have Courtney's last name. I'm a pretty good sleuth, but I have no way of knowing Courtney's last name.
Okay. Let's move on to this. What about phone info? So when Paul left, did he take his phone with him? Do we have any phone information, pings, records from those 2 weeks?
Okay. So when Paul left, he did have his iPhone, which was new, and his car keys, his iPhone, his driver's license, and his debit card. And the phone, we obviously we called it over and over, and we're, I think we sent more text messages than voicemails. For one thing, I think I didn't want to run down his battery because I knew that, unless he was going to find a charger, the battery was going to die, and who knew if he was in a condition to do that, or if it was even in his possession anymore, or if he sold it, So anyway, yes, he did have his phone, and we called it. We tried to work with the phone company. iPhones are like one of the most protected things in the world. They're just almost impossible to get. Like, Apple will just not help you unless you have what's called a legacy account, which I would encourage everyone to do. But anyway, we didn't get anywhere at all with iPhone, but we did. Unfortunately, the carrier he used is called Visible, and I'm real happy with it. It's a budget thing, but it uses Verizon towers and stuff. Unfortunately, because it's like a budget, $25 a month unlimited, you don't get a bill with your itemized calls and texts. So, and it was very hard to get that. I spent a lot of time getting that, and I did eventually get it, but it identified the phone numbers that had been made previous to that. And I spent a lot of time trying to, do some reverse number lookups and calling these numbers and trying to figure out who these people might have been. But they were almost all several days prior. There was like very, very little phone activity the day and the day before he went missing. He wasn't using his phone much. So I'm trying to remember. Oh, I think we did eventually get a ping that sort of we were able to triangulate. We never found the phone, and we never got any helpful information like you would think that you would get.
That is unfortunate. Okay, so really minimal when it comes to phone info. Really minimal.
Very. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's unfortunate. And we also have to maybe be open to the idea after he went missing, could he have gotten another phone? And, one of those track phones, you pay as you go, and then that's really, really, really going to get difficult. Okay.
Right.
We brought up the license plate, the car stuff, so let's talk about it right now. We have to remember he was driving a Toyota Avalon.
That's what the police officer identified the car as. I wouldn't have ever had any idea.
All right, that's kind of like a mid-size car. And has that car ever been identified as being somebody? Since we know it's, unless Paul bought a car during those 2 weeks, probably wasn't Paul's car, ever been identified to an owner.
I think that we could safely say that that was somebody else's car.
Okay. And now, the video was good enough that a license plate, what could be seen, could be read, but tell the listeners about the license plate.
Well, actually, I don't think that that is correct, because the police officer said, I can't read that plate off of the, like, where are you getting this plate? Somebody would have had to have been outside to see that. And I said, it's on a brown lunch bag. The owner went outside and wrote it down on a brown lunch bag, and he gave it to Steve and me.
Wow.
That's how I gave you that plate number.
Okay. All right. So it was not clear, but the owner is there, sees what's going on out there, and he has the presence of mind to go out and get license plate numbers?
Yep. Well, of the Avalon.
Yeah,
of the
Avalon.
Not the
other car.
And actually, I suspect the first time that the owner went out there, it was probably only Paul in the Avalon. It was. I doubt if he would have walked out when he knew a deal was going on.
Okay, yeah. Okay, but the license plate not connected to a Toyota Avalon.
That's right. So the police officer, of course, ran that plate, and it was associated with a Camry, and it was kind of nowhere. It was just like not useful information. I can't remember if he said that the Camry had reported their plate stolen and just gotten a new plate, or I think that might have been it. It wasn't anything meaningful. But it was clear that Avalon had borrowed or stolen another plate. So, maybe it didn't have a plate, maybe, who knows, or they just switched it.
Right, and we cannot take for granted that just because Paul's driving that car does not mean he's the one that stole that plate. It could be actually's car it is, and it very well could be the Toyota Avalon was stolen or something. It doesn't necessarily mean that Paul was, part of that at all. The stealing of the car, if the car was stolen, anything like that, he's just driving the car. So we could not connect, to your knowledge, I'm sure the police could, but you don't know, if the license plate could be connected to a particular address.
That I don't know. I'll ask Officer Hunt tomorrow again, but it'll be too late for this.
That might be interesting to know, because it might put approximate location of whoever did take the plate, and if you knew who the owner was, you can contact the owner and say, well, where do you think, did it get stolen from? Out in your driveway? Was it at work? Were you at a Starbucks? Where do you think this happened? It might be at least a little helpful. But as far as the information for the other car, the one that seemingly had Courtney in it, it's just a car right now. No license plate, nothing regarding that.
That's right. Black hatchback.
Okay. Now, regarding the Joy Mart, how sure are you that Paul has not returned to that Joy Mart since the second video was made on November 13th of 2023?
I don't really have any way to give a degree of confidence. I think it's entirely possible that he has, and just because he did before, and it seems to be like where a lot of drug activity is going on. But I also don't have any, reason. I guess the main thing I would say that if Paul had returned when the owner was there, there's a good chance the owner would have seen him and contacted us. Okay. But I don't have any way of knowing. There's plenty of times when the owner's not working, so it is entirely possible.
Now, we should make something clear. The people who Paul met in the first video from October 29th are different from the people he met on November 13th.
Yes, that's correct.
They are. Okay. And those people from October 29th, are they known? Do you know their names or not?
No. The only identifier was the owner saying that she was black girl and Paul was white boy, and I'm white boy's mama.
Okay. All right, so there could be no known connection has been made, at least at this point, between who Paul met on October 29th and who he met on November 13th.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I need to go back and ask you this. Of course, Paul goes missing. He goes missing. You're trying to figure out what happened to him from October 29th. And there was nothing that you found amongst his clothes, his possessions in your house that could nothing pointed you in a direction as to far as, any writing down, I'm supposed to meet John Smith that day or anything like that. Anything that you discovered, no little avenues of inquiry that were created.
No. And I went through, all of his pants pockets. I looked in his room. I looked under his mattress. I looked in his car. I did find some scribbled phone numbers in his car, and I called them, and most of them were like Jiffy Lube, or, like they were not, there wasn't anything meaningful in any of those. I will add this also. If Paul wanted a car, he could have, if he was bold enough to walk up to the Joy Mart a half a mile from our house, he could have easily walked in the alley behind our house and taken his car, because even if he lost his car key, he knew there was a magnet box under it. So he never took his car.
That is puzzling. I agree with you. That is interesting. Huh.
He also there was never any more debit activity on that card after that $200 withdrawal. And there was over $1,000 in the account. So it wasn't like he, had used up all his funds.
And that account is still open to this day. We have to remember this is I put only in quotations, only 2 years ago. Money still in that account if you wanted to access it?
Yes. And actually, there was a brief period. I recently checked it, and for some reason, and I couldn't get logged on. I was having a really hard time. I had to have my husband call and impersonate, or just be a male voice for me. And it turned out that, and so keep this in mind too, listeners, I would never have guessed this, that after less than 2 years, or just over 2 years, whatever, I don't know within what period of time, because I didn't ask, they had actually frozen his account because of lack of activity. So we had a very hard time logging on again, and we couldn't even get the account number because they stopped sending us statements, which I hadn't noticed. And so, I think I finally went up in the attic and found some old statements and was able to give them the account number, have Steve give them the account number. But anyway, so there actually was a period of time that it's been frozen. But, and again, I thought it would be hard for him to access that money because he usually loses everything as soon as he uses his phone, his keys, his debit card. Everything is missing, in a short time, typically. So maybe he wouldn't have had his card. But, it's a bank that has a lot of different branches. And even if you don't have your driver's license, there's security questions. You could walk in the bank and say, I've lost all my stuff. Can you get but it did not appear that he ever made any attempt. I think I would have, I guess I wouldn't have seen activity if he had just gone in asking that, but he never tried to do anything online and never tried to use a card again, nor did anyone else ever use his debit card again.
Okay.
And I just keep they've unfrozen it permanently now, and so I do keep that account active, because if he is alive and is restarting it, wanting to start a life over or whatever, and it occurs to him, maybe the cloud's cleared, he's like, oh, I've got, at least $1,000 at Truist, I should, go get that or whatever, or try. So anyway, I keep that account as it is. I kept his cell phone active for about 6 months, maybe even more. And then I finally just decided there was really no reason. I mean, there'd never been any activity.
Are you under the impression that if he had gotten in trouble with the law, whether in North Carolina or South Carolina, Virginia, that area of the United States, that he would pop up? That police would realize he is a missing person or has been registered as a missing person? Yeah, I mean, Officer Hunt insists that if his name is run by any officer anywhere in the United States, it will pop up that he's a missing person. That being said, there are times when cops will stop and talk to you, and they might ask you your name, and they might not, and they might not ever run it. So it doesn't mean that he's never had. It doesn't guarantee that he's never had any kind of encounter with an officer. But his, according to
the way it's been explained to me, and the reason I say that is I don't ever believe there's a perfect system. It is supposed to pop up. And that is through NAMUS, or actually that's not, whatever the police put in with the national thing, like when I had him reported him missing. He's also listed in NAMUS, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yep.
And I think CODIS is where our DNA got sent, and then also to the SBI. Okay. My husband and mine.
Let's move on to this. You did bring up to me in a previous conversation that you've entertained the idea, or maybe somebody mentioned it to you, that could, we have a car and it's not Paul's car and it has a different license plate on it. Could he have gotten into some, as a drug mule, let's just say drug trafficking, moving drugs for people? Is this something that came to your mind, or something that was mentioned to you? Have you spoken to the police about it?
I don't know that I've specifically talked to the police about that. I've certainly entertained that he was somehow becoming part of a network, and I don't know what all the players are. I think dealer is pretty high. I've heard the term mule, which is maybe a person who carries drugs to a location and maybe doesn't, I don't even know that they do the sale. But anyway, it absolutely occurred to me that he might have been, elected, selected, asked to do whatever, but somehow been, ended up with some sort of a role in the process of selling.
Okay. Did, to your knowledge, has given all these traveling, he does bike across the United States, I guess, almost technically 2 times. Ever use any aliases? Was he comfortable maybe going to Mexico? I mean, if we're to look at this as an angle, anything within any of that come to mind?
As far as aliases, like I said, it used to be really easy if you ran a person's name for the records to pop up. And Paul didn't. That arrest in Boone, like I said, was a kind of significant one, and that's always what came up if you put in Paul Isaac Holmes, and he hated that, so he changed his Facebook to Paul Oscar Holmes, and sometimes he would use Paulie Oscar, like as Oscar as a last name, almost.
Okay.
His grandfather was Paul Oscar Gustafson, and there was even one time, but it was when Paul was really delusional, that he told a police officer that his name was Paul Gustafson, and he was time traveling. So, but he also gave the police officer my correct phone number, and the officer called me, and I told him who Paul was and told him to please take him to the hospital, because the officer was in Colorado. But so anyway, other than using Paulie Oscar, which is more of a nickname than an alias, I don't think so. But of course it's possible that he is now if he's still living. But it wasn't something. There were actually, and it's insignificant, I'll try to keep this point short, but there were actually people along the way that told me that Paul was using an alias, that he was going by, I'm not going to say the boy's name for his privacy, and that Paul had gone to TROSA, which is a very good drug program in our area, and under that assumed name, and that then he was unalive, which is, I wasn't familiar with that word, but I think it's like, it's dead, but I think that's used to like not pop up in the same way on messages or something, or searches, I don't know. But anyway, it turned out that there really was a boy with that name, and he looked so much like Paul. And he did go to TROSA. And he did die. And so people were telling me that Paul was using an alias, and that he'd gone to TROSA, and that he died, and all this, and I was just giving the information to the police. And the police came over, and he said, you see the cop at the door after you say this, and your heart just sinks. And he started asking me questions about why I thought that Paul was using that name and everything. And I explained, and he said, okay, I just want to tell you that it's not Paul. And that really is this kid's name. And he showed me a picture of him. And they even had, their birthdays were even several days apart. Just one of those weird things. So that was the only time I started to think that Paul might have been using an alias. But I remember at the time thinking that it was not something it didn't seem in character, but who knows? if you really want to change your identity.
Okay. And how tough has this been? It's been over 2 years now. We're doing this interview on December 1st of 2025.
Right.
How tough has this been?
There is not like a scale to describe it. It's horrible. And I think about him every day. I miss him every day. I don't cry every day, but I cry a little bit almost every day. I cry a lot when I talk about him. Sometimes I can talk about him without crying, but it's really hard. I think it is a lot different than a death. It isn't worse than a death, and I'll never say that it is, because I know there's a possibility that my son is alive.
However, for sure.
With a death, you have a starting place to begin to mourn and process all those feelings. And I don't have a starting place because I don't have any idea what's happened. Like I said, there's some times where I think the most likely scenario is that he overdosed within a short period of time, obviously after that second sighting, but still within a short period of time, and that his body is in some secluded place in Durham. But then I have to remind myself, you don't have any evidence of that. You have no more evidence of that than that he's alive someplace, whether it's in the homeless world or, with drug addicts or in a trap house or starting over fresh with some kind soul like Roger Mortimer. I don't know. But yeah, it's awful. It's absolutely awful.
What kind of relationship, you've mentioned the police many times during this interview. What kind of relationship do you have with them after the last 2 years?
I have a very good relationship with Corporal Hunt, who is the one that's in charge of Paul's case, and he's been very kind. And anything that I've asked him to do, if he can do it, he does it. Like I said, I know the search would have been bigger and broader if Paul fit a different profile. But I do feel like they've made the efforts that I would expect. And one question I remember I did ask, every once in a while I'll ask something and he'll just say, no, I can't do that, or we can't do that. I did ask about a different kind of dog, did they have dogs? And he said the problem is that their dogs are more dangerous, and that basically, if they're going after a dangerous criminal and they, rather than, they don't want to shoot him in the back, right, if they don't have to, but if they have a dog that can go after a criminal and bring the criminal down, but yeah, he might get bit. So anyway, he said we don't bring dogs out in cases like this to find people like Paul. This, it would be a risk. And I don't remember if I asked him about cadaver dogs, but it is a question I probably will ask him tomorrow.
Okay, you can ask him. I wouldn't expect much. But yeah, I guess you have to do it. But I think at this point, once again, you know my attitude. If this disappearance is going to get solved, whether Paul is alive or deceased, I don't think dogs are going to do it. But, after 2 years, that would really, really challenge my imagination. But I realize you have to do it.
Cadaver dog is just searching for remains. They're not searching for a specific person. So it's not like a SAR search and rescue dog. So that's why I feel like there is a possibility that he could have overdosed and died in this area. We own a small piece of property, about an acre out in the country, 20 minutes from where we live. We have a camper out there that he liked to go to sometimes, and I'm telling you, we have searched everything in that camper to see if there's any evidence that he could have gone out there, and we have searched every square inch of the ground out there, and it doesn't appear that he went out there since the time he's been missing.
Okay. Do you have a Facebook page, website, anything like that set up for Paul's disappearance? If so, tell the listeners about it right now.
So I do have a Facebook page, but I don't know how to tell you how to find it because I'm not very.
Just say what the title of it is. What's the title of it?
I think it's just Ann Holmes, and I usually tell people search Ian Holmes, but then throw in Durham, North Carolina, and my hometown is Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I'm pretty sure you'll come up with it. But that seems like kind of cumbersome. Is there a more direct way?
I guess what I'm asking, you don't have a Facebook page just set up for Paul's disappearance, where find missing Paul. This is just an example. Find missing Paul Holmes with his picture and all these details and all. You don't have something like that set up yet?
So I thought I had a separate, so I tried to do a new Facebook page, right? But it's really, it wasn't letting me do that. But like I say, I don't really know what I'm doing. So someone told me, well, you can't really have a whole new account. You have to just have another page.
That's right. It's
linked.
A branch of your
And I thought that I did that. And I thought it was just something like Paul Holmes missing or something. But I can't find it now. So I don't know if there was some reason I took it off. It could have been, at one point I also tried doing like a Facebook ad, which is about the sleaziest, scammiest thing.
It is. Yes, it is.
And,
I agree.
And a friend of mine said, try it, because you never know. But use a prepaid credit card so that it can't keep taking your money. Because you'll never get it back.
Idea.
It'll just. Right. So I bought it. They said, just go buy a $50 Visa gift card or something and put that number in. And so I did. And I was able to deactivate the darn thing before it took the full $50. But yeah, don't ever put a credit card in on one of those ads unless you really know a whole lot more than about what you're doing. So I thought that I had this separate page for that, but maybe I got rid of it because of that ad.
Okay. I think you need to get into that again. That needs to be a before the end of the year thing, I think.
Okay. Can I link your podcast to that?
Sure. What you can link? Yeah, sure, absolutely. But let's just get a Facebook page for Paul's disappearance. Period. Set up so people can go there and say find Paul Holmes, and it'll come up.
Okay. So is it linked to my same account?
It's somewhat. It's connected. Account? Like, I have the Facebook page for this podcast, Unfound, and it is a part of my my private Facebook page for Edward Dentzel. It's you have to go over there at top right corner, and you have to kind of what we might call change personas or something like that. It just doesn't let you start a page just random. You actually have to have a personal page on Facebook to start a page for a missing person or a restaurant or a podcast or whatever else.
I thought I had done that, but I was trying to find that other persona of myself, like you referred to it the other day. I was playing around, and I'm like, I'm not finding it, so I'll do that.
Yeah, got to get it done. Anne, any final words before we complete this interview?
Just that I really want to let you know how much I appreciate that you've made it your work to help people like me with that chance that maybe they'll be the one that finds their person. So I really appreciate that.
You're very welcome. And I've told you this.
Letting me be one of those people.
Yeah. Well, you're very welcome. And I will tell you publicly what I told you privately, that I think there is a decent chance that Paul is still alive. And we've covered a couple disappearances where Ashley Linden, coincidentally from my part of Florida in the Tampa area, she was thought to be deceased. Nope, she ended up being alive. Kind of the same thing, drug issues, mental health issues. And certainly for a woman, it's much more dangerous. And she ended up being alive. And then we also had a guy, Brandon Roberts, who went missing in Portland, Oregon, homeless. Once again, somebody else ended up having his phone, and he was really in a bad spot. He was missing for a few years, and guess what? He ended up being alive too. And my understanding, and just speaking to his mother recently, is that he's doing very well. So this is what I'm hearing from you. No guarantees, but I think at least 2 years into this, there's certainly reasons to believe that Paul is still out there alive somewhere.
Right. Well, thank you for drawing light to it for us. And I don't know how you select who you want to, feature, but I really appreciate that you chose Paul.
You're very welcome. I'm always looking for disappearances to feature. I mean, I'm reaching out to people. This is what I do every day. I read missing persons news, Facebook pages, websites, all sorts of things, just randomly Googling things. So that's really how we go about it here. That's what we do.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ed, and I wish your dad a happy birthday.
Okay, I'll tell him, and
visit with him.
I will. I'll tell him, and I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Yeah, you can let him listen to that part where I said happy birthday to Ed.
I will do that for sure.
All right. Thank you again.
You're welcome. And that was my December 1st, 2025 interview with Anne, mother of Paul Holmes. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. I want to continue on the theme that I started at the beginning of this episode, especially now that you have heard from Anne and have heard her question some of the decisions she made. I reiterate what I said to her in the interview. I'm not sure there's any perfect choice. There are only choices. Paul was doing things he shouldn't have been doing. He chose to start, and seemingly he could choose to end doing drugs as well. Then he chose to start again. And for every parent that throws money and rehab at a child, and the child recovers, another parent does the same and nothing changes. Likewise, for every parent who draws a line in the sand, like Paul's parents did with him, and it doesn't work, other parents will do the same, and it does. There are no guarantees. Like I said, there are only choices. There are no good choices. There is only the next day, the next week, the next year. The sun will continue to rise and set. However, I never want any of you to think that this then means Paul's disappearance was inevitable. And likewise for Jody and Corinna, who I mentioned in the opening, no disappearance is inevitable. Paul was not destined to disappear. The action or inaction of his parents did not cause this to all happen. Instead, Paul's choices and Paul's addiction made it more likely that he would disappear. How much so? Not as much as we all think. Most people like Paul don't go missing. Yet, it's enough. No different than speeding in a car. You're simply raising the odds of a wreck. You're not guaranteeing one. To end this episode on a brighter note, though, like we learned with Brandon Roberts and Trevor Nichols, who are very much both like Paul, young men, as long as they're not missing for too long, can be found alive. That is my hope for Paul and his family. Yet, this doesn't mean the cycle of addiction, doubt, and guilt cannot eventually start again. If you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of Paul Holmes, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. Sign up and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.